Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Congestion Revenue Rights Enhancement Stakeholder Call. Just want to make sure everyone in the room can hear us. At this point, we will be kicking off this first working group meeting as a scoping discussion. And my name is Brenda Marquez. On behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs Group and the California ISO, we welcome you to our meeting. This is a hybrid meeting, and today I'll be covering a few housekeeping reminders before we get started. Today's call is being recorded, and for informational and convenience purposes only, any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This meeting is also structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, so we definitely appreciate comments that are professional and respectful, both verbal and chat. Please try to be brief and refrain from repeating any questions or any comments that were previously said, so we can manage our time effectively and also provide that offline support if you need it for our stakeholders. For today's questions, for those who are on the WebEx, we're about 56 attendees. Our participants are allowed to raise their hand using the raise hand icon located on the bottom of your screen. We don't have any audio only line right now, so for those who will join us audio only, press the *3 and you'll be dialed into that call to be asking a question. We also have those folks that are on the call on site at the California ISO. My colleague, Yelena, will be there to assist if there's any questions on using any of the microphones that are in front of you. So make sure on that mic, when you click the button, it turns green. Give it like 2 seconds, and you'll be able to ask a question through that mic for our stakeholders. So Yelena will help us make sure if there's any questions, we could take those questions on site and then also balance the questions that we have on the queue on the WebEx. So if there's any questions, my event producer here today is Ahmed. He'll be also providing technical support during the call. And then we will be helping everyone. Hopefully everyone has a great meeting with what we are providing today in this hybrid format. And thanks so much for joining for those who are on site as well. For today's agenda, I'll cover one more slide on the stakeholder process, and then I'll kick it off and pass it to our panelist group that are on site on the video here today. We do have Partha. He's our principal for resource adequacy at the California ISO. We also have Hillary Staver, who's also the lead policy developer. And we have Dinesh Dasgupta, who's our policy developer as well, supporting this initiative/working group. I also see David, who just joined us. He's one of our council attorneys here. So good to see you, David. And so he'll be there as well. And we do have Philip Roth, who's joined us virtually. He's our senior market design engineer through the California ISO market production team. So he's also online with us as a panelist. So we look forward for any questions, discussions. For today's agenda, just want to recap really quick. So Partha will cover the introduction and timeline and have conceptual foundations for CRRs. Haley will give us an ISO current CR program overview, as well. Dinesh will also provide a summary of existing analysis and identifying future analysis needs. In about 10:30, we'll take like a 10-minute break and let our stakeholders on site and also those on WebEx to take a quick break, and we'll touch back on the roadmap items that are really important that we have discussed in the annual policy roadmap for the 2024. And also for the 2024 roadmap, we have posted that policy draft initiatives roadmap spreadsheet, so I can link that on our chat later. That notice will be going out today as well for those who want to kind of continue reviewing that recurring process we have going on. And then also around 11:10, we'll have a problem statements and starting point with Hillary, and then she will open up an open discussion for our stakeholders both on site and also virtual. And then I'll recap and do the next steps for this meeting, and then hopefully everyone will definitely use the time, and any tools, any questions, let us know. We'll be here both on site, and Yelena's on site as well to help support for those who are there. But at this point, let's go ahead and do one more slide. This is an overview of the policy initiative stakeholder process. Currently, we are during the proposal development phase of the working group stage, so we do expect a few items that our team is going to be discussing that we are working on to go towards the issue paper that will be happening later next year. So we will kind of discuss that. But at this point, we're really on the early base of the proposal development phase of this working group. And at this time, let's go ahead and give CAISO boardroom presentation rights so they can move their slides in the clicker. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Brenda. And this is Partha Malvadkar with the California ISO. I really appreciate that introduction. And I'd like to thank as well everybody who, particularly who joined us in person here today. Just as a selling point for folks on the phone, we have a nice breakfast here. So, for future meetings, if you're able to attend in person, we certainly welcome that. But recognizing there are, travel and other limitations, so we really appreciate the robust participation remotely as well. So, as we kind of jump into this working group process, I wanted to sort of provide a little bit of the kind of grounding in terms of why we're having the working group and sort of why we're sort of re-kicking off this initiative in the process that we're thinking about, and that just to sort of maybe to recognize up front that. I recognize that there's a lot of different stakeholders, participating in this process with a lot of different backgrounds and knowledge. There was, we certainly recognize that, even recently as, 2018, 2017, 2018, we had a fairly lengthy two-part initiative where we had, CRR track 1A and 1B reform, which was, attempting to solve many of the same challenges that stakeholders have identified as being needed for this initiative, and that some stakeholders are really going to be grounded with a lot of expertise in CRRs going into this. But we simultaneously recognize that there has been some amount of time delay, 5+ years, as well as a number of new participants who will be likely to be participating in this prospect with new perspectives. So. Part of our thinking for the working group process, and this is really subject to your all's input and feedback, is that we're thinking about having really providing time to sort of have some foundation setting, in terms of what are CRRs, how what was sort of the foundational purpose when CRRs were created, having time to understand how our current processes work, and having the details laid out. And that we're really wanting to have, maybe one, maybe two additional working groups that help lay out and provide that foundation. And we recognize that it might be the case that not all participants will want to attend that foundation setting processes. But, we're really interested in sort of feedback in terms of what are people wanting to hear more about, what are people really wanting to sort of ground themselves in as sort of important details before we get to the problem statement and policy development. The second part that we thought would be useful as well is really kind of that same kind of grounding, but really maybe in the other direction in terms of understanding from stakeholders kind of the use and impact of the CRRs on various processes, from in particular how they're used sort of in hedging risk. We obviously had that as sort of one of the foundational goals of CRRs is to provide that hedging, and that to understand, how you all use them, what the impact has been in terms of the changes to the hedging ability, and to basically develop a common understanding of participants on how they're used by different entities. I think could be impactful. We also recognize as well that a large piece of this is really, and that what we've committed to do in the past has been to provide analysis in terms of the CRR, how the process is functioning today. What have we seen since 2019 in terms of some of those key metrics and objectives, particularly around revenue adequacy and auction efficiency in particular, and that we have a series of steps that we're planning on taking in terms of current analysis that's already in the works, but as well as trying to make sure that we have feedback from you all, as well as trying to, as we more fully scope out what's all the analysis that you all would like to see, that could be influential in terms of developing those problem statements. And I think that the last step we're really kind of looking at is like coming out of the working group processes, can we have, I would say the way I would describe it for this one is a common understanding of different goals and problem statements as we go into policy development. And I think, we come here with, an expectation at least that there will likely be very different goals that different participants have. And that, at least, through this process, we're really hoping that people are, keeping an open mind and really wanting to learn and understand different people's perspectives and use. And then as we sort of develop out the problem statements, we can do that with sort of that common understanding of framing, and that they might not be sort of all consistent in terms of like that there might be different problem statements that might lead to different policy solutions, but at least having that grounding we think would be foundationally helpful. Do I control the slides, by the way? All right. Let's see if we're successful. Great. So we've mapped out, and this I describe as a very tentative schedule for the working group. So, and once again, looking for your feedback. And even as we created this, as I alluded to before, I fully expected there to be a number of participants who are a little more along the mindset of, haven't we done this? Are we ready to go to policy development? I know the problem statements. I have specific solutions I want implemented. But there are, we expected there to be others who did not. So we really thought of how having, while this is more of the scoping discussion today, we're gonna provide a little bit of background information. We'd like to really hear more about like, how do we have, maybe one, maybe two workshops in January that are sort of built around, developing out that foundation of knowledge. And that would sort of progress as well to having in February, where we could provide an overview, and some of it would be probably level setting some of the analysis that our market analysis team has already shared at the Market Surveillance Committee and other places, as well as some of that incremental analysis that is being performed in terms of the functioning of the CRR processes. From there, we'd hope to move towards that, defining the policy scope and the problem statements, and then ultimately having an issue paper out in May that we could take towards the policy development. So maybe I'll pause there just to see if there's any questions or reactions to start before we jump in further.
I don't see any questions online, but we'll keep an eye out for you guys if there are. Thank you.
Okay. And well, maybe I'll say before we move on, we also recognize the fact that this will be fluid, and that I think we're gonna come back to this exact same slide at the end of today and try to understand, do we get this cadence and this timing right? Are there certain scope items? I'm more surprised that someone hasn't raised their hand already to say, no, I want something different, or I want something added, or I want something faster. But we'll give sort of more time for that feedback. We really are hoping that this is, stakeholder-led and stakeholder-driven in terms of what you all are wanting to see and get out of the working group phase. And that, particularly, I think that like on that education piece, requests that you all have, I think will be super important. We want to make sure that what we're doing and providing is sort of meeting your all's needs, as well as, is more of an open offer throughout this process. If there are, one of the things that we had scope for today is we're going to, a couple of the parties who provided feedback in our stakeholder catalog requesting prioritization of CRR changes, we'll be sort of speaking to their issues very briefly, just more of the trying to provide that scoping and overview of sort of what was included in the catalog. But we're really hoping that for them, as well as for others here that have additional challenges or wanted to provide more, we certainly are really hoping that there's sort of robust participation where there's probably guess my blunt take is it's less time for us to be talking and more time for you all to be talking in terms of sharing and providing that feedback with each other. So, yeah. If you're willing to flip to, oh, I have. I'm not used to having control of the clicker, so thanks, Hillary. Well, with that, we thought we'd I think the next section we're going to provide a little bit of and maybe I'll just share just to start off. The goal of this is not to have like an in-depth look about the conceptual foundations of CRRs or an in-depth look at the ISO's programming design, but it's really designed to provide kind of that high-level view. And that the goal of this is not just for, at the end of it, to say like, yes, I have a complete, like that has been a complete, discussion around that conceptual foundation, but more of a, is there something here that we're missing? Is there some item that we really need to be focusing more on going into that education piece? And that part of the goal of these next slides is really kind of that grounding in it. And that one of the things that we thought we probably wanted to spend time on in the working group was at least sort of starting with the understanding of, what has been the current precedent at FERC in terms of the creation of, financial transmission rights and congestion revenue rights in organized markets. And then from the California ISO standpoint, how do we get to where we're at? And particularly, including the paper was a number of the references to the MRT redesign where we laid out some of the basis for how CRRs fit into the market construct. So, and I'll describe this briefly. I don't think we have to. I'm probably more interested in hearing from you all and what you all want to have. But the way I would describe at least the FERC precedent is that there's not really one centralized forum of saying, FERC having one document of here's our purpose and use of CRRs in organized markets. But there really is probably a series of cases as well. Cases and rulemakings in which FERC provided the precedent for that. And I'm saying this with some David is our legal expert here and can provide a lot more of the background on it. But, kind of those foundational purposes of FERC and the rulemakings was to continue to provide open access as to transmission as we move from, as entities move from a Order 888 OAT-based structure towards a market-based structure that required transmission rights. The second piece that was sort of foundational in many of the precedents was to ensure that they're allocating fairly the transmission revenues to those people that were paying the embedded cost of the system. And then kind of that last foundational purpose was to allow hedging of congestion cost in the context of the day-ahead energy market. And so none of this is just, obviously this is, FERC's decisions are always changing. And so we're not necessarily having these as trying to establish as bedrock principles, but we really think that maybe spending more time to try to understand how they were developed, what the basis was going to be kind of critical as we look towards further policy changes and development. So maybe I'll pause on the FERC one real quick to see if there's any. Once again, I recognize that there's lots of expertise here, lots of perspectives. If there's anyone who wanted to share more, to provide more insight, or to sort of say like, here's an area I'd really want you to go deeper on going forward. I'd love to hear that feedback. I'd also welcome, David, if you wanted to provide anything more about FERC in particular.
So as a reminder for folks on the WebEx, we do have that raise hand located on the top of your chat window. and they'll let us know that you want to go ahead and ask a question. And also, I do see folks who are dialed in audio only, so do press *3 on your telephone keypad to raise your hand.
Yeah, this is David here. While we're waiting for folks to queue up, yeah, I'll just sort of piggyback on what Partha was saying. I think in the paper you saw we were going back to some of the MRTU filings where you saw we were kind of pulling up some of the testimony from that proceeding, from that, I guess it was 2006, or some of those documents. So just to go back to kind of first principles about why we had CRRs in the first place and what, when we created it, the ISO statements of why we have them, what was the purpose they were meant to serve, and sort of what the high level principles were behind it. And so I think those are important to keep in mind as we move forward in this process. And I think, it is worth having taking a moment here if we want, if anyone looks at those and thinks, well, actually, I don't agree with that, or I think, some of those purposes don't make sense anymore. That's from 2006. It's 2024. Let's reevaluate, and the world has changed. I mean, this is a good time to have that conversation, because I think, those are all fair points to raise if you want to, and now is certainly the time if there's sort of foundational changes that have happened in terms of what a CRR is, what it should be.
And we do have 3 hands, so let's go to J.K. Wang. And I believe, J.K., please be sure to introduce yourself, I think, for PG&E. Double check on that audio. Ahmed, can you go ahead and unmute J.K. Wang?
Good morning. This is J.K. Wang from PG&E. I have a quick question. First of all, very much appreciate CAISO revisit the questions and discussions we had before about CRRs, and take the time to develop this working group aiming at an issue paper with all of the engagement from the stakeholders. I just want to clarify, understanding there's EDAM and DAM in parallel, and expect the implementation date in 2025 and 2026. I wonder whether there will be any of the effort considered interaction of the CRR with the DAME and the potential possibilities, any impact with the EDAM.
Thank you, JFK, for that question. Currently, that is not something we have scoped as a part of this. I recognize as well there has been a number of questions that have been asked in other forums around this, and that I think that part of what this exercise would be sort of just scope topics. If there are sort of specific issues that have some of the regional partners have, I think that we're certainly wanting to have that insight into it. That wasn't something. The issues that you're describing around the EDAM in particular, I don't think that we have that as currently scoped, but would love to hear more to the degree that there are specific items that you believe need to be addressed, and then we can think about if this is the right forum for that discussion, or if there is another venue. So,
and just to clarify that question, was that a question about implementation efforts, as in, whatever happens in this initiative, is there going to be bandwidth to do this and continue on the DAME and EDAM implementation? Or was it a question more about how would the potential policy changes fit in with the policy changes that are going to be implemented? Was it a policy question or an implementation question?
That very good clarification. The latter is a policy question. For example, I understand the regional issue is more complicated, but for DME, the imbalance reserve is developed, and it also impacts how congestion is calculated in the IFM. So since this effort seems to will revisit the design of the simultaneous feasibility test as well, it seems a good opportunity to consider the new factors will play in after the DME implementation. As if we do not consider that may need to be revisited again in 1 year or so. So I appreciate CAISO if can take that into consideration.
Thanks, JK, for that clarification. Yeah, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Next, we do have call-in user 11. Go ahead and unmute, and please be sure to introduce yourself and your company title.
Just as an FYI, if the person is speaking, we can't hear them.
Oh,
Sorry,
so
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay, perfect. This is Milha on behalf of the Energy Trading Institute. Thanks, sorry about that. For some reason, it took a minute for my mic to unmute. Okay, so hi, Partha. Thank you guys for putting this together. One thing that I was just thinking about as you were going through the FERC precedent and kind of talking about this up through 2006, you know, in a recent FERC order that's about 2 years old, they kind of reiterated a lot of these things. And they reiterated that in response to a lot of analysis that was done in the PJM market, and the similar analysis was also done in the MISO market. So it would be really helpful, I think, if during one of those January workshops, you guys kind of went into a little bit of detail about how that analysis lined up with this precedent and sort of how FERC arrived at the same decision just a few years ago, just to kind of like get everyone up to speed to the more, you know, the most recent information.
No, that's helpful. Thanks for the feedback. And one of the exercises that we were planning on doing and we're looking for feedback on was, benchmarking, where I think particularly trying to understand what, including the paper, we have kind of a brief write-up of the Midwest ISO. But if there were other markets that people wanted ISO staff to do some benchmarking on, we'd also certainly welcome others presenting their perspectives on sort of what other markets were doing, how they were working, and how they were addressing potentially similar problems that we have. I think that we'd be welcome to that. So yeah, thank you for that feedback. We'll certainly, we've noted that PJM, the series of PJM cases around CRRs, and if particularly for, I guess, for everyone on the call, if there are certain ones like that you'd like to have us sort of focus on or benchmark for either best practices or for understanding the precedent, we'd be interested in that feedback. So thank you.
Do we have any questions in the room before we take the other caller?
I believe we might have one, but maybe not. Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
this is Daniel Kurtz with California Department of Water Resources, and just to make sure that I understand, we have a little bit of talk yesterday with Juan and some of you guys here, and to us, Department of Water Resources, it looks like those foundations are met in the tariff. I mean, the way the tariff is written, including the track 1B, the foundation are written well. However, 10 years prior to the track 1B and 6 years after, we've seen that, and that's the whole purpose of starting this working groups. We've seen that some things, they don't work. And maybe that's the things that you guys expected from the market participants, to find out why they didn't work and what we can do to improve. But the foundation, to me, the way they're written, are equitable and they're right. Now, from theory to practice, it's all the time that big problems, that issues arise. And Track 1B fixed some of the issues from 50 cents paid to $1 benefits to auction participating in the CRR auction is right now 69 cents, but there's still some problems. Some bear on the low debt service entities, they pay the rest. And yesterday we didn't talk too much. We didn't talk too much about the discussion of the CRR auction efficiency. We focused on the previous three issues that ISO, the TWR submitted in the ISO initiative meeting, but I didn't see that you guys planning on talking about CRR auction efficiency, CRR revenue inadequacy today. Is that part of the?
Yeah, it certainly is. I think that's part of the scoping exercise. And I think what I'd recognize is the fact that I think that part of how we were proceeding today was more of based on our starting point was really based on what came out of the track 1A and 1B for CRs, as well as the stakeholder feedback received in the catalog process. And that wasn't the only scope that we would be willing to entertain. That was at least the starting point of saying, here's what we have documented in terms of what problem statements look like. And, so two of the items that I think will be discussed a little bit is, the DMM has offered to share a little bit of their thoughts on some of the auction inefficiency issues that they flagged, as well as the roadmap that some of the problem statements analysis, as well as potential solutions to explore. And then I think the issues of revenue, sort of the revenue inadequacy that have continued has been something that was flagged, by WPTF as well as by other stakeholders. And that I think we'll have a brief discussion of that, but I think that those two topics, I think it's probably fairly clear, will be sort of large scope items, and then obviously, CDWR, you all had flagged other additional items that were a step beyond what was addressed in track 1A and 1B. And that I think that having, level setting on those and providing kind of a foundation around like how you all saw those problem statements are those ones that should be included in the scope as well. I think that's how we're thinking about proceeding. So, thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Any more callers on the phone?
Yeah, Todd Ryan, let's go ahead and unmute him. And that should be the last question. Thank you.
Morning, Todd Ryan with Pacific Gas and Electric. Hey, Partha, I really appreciate the historical context. I'm curious, is there priority or ranking of the three kind of high-level goals that you show on page 10? Does FERC kind of weigh one more than the other?
Look to David. I certainly did not, like at least in my, as part of this exercise, I went back to, and there's a number of people who went back to sort of the past precedents. I certainly didn't see anything that looked like a ranking order of saying, here's the hierarchy of priorities within the CRR construct. I think it was more of that foundational basis as for, at least in terms of FERC in particular, as they're looking to transform from the, OAP-based structure to LMP-based structure, and the need to create transmission rights that allowed for sort of similar hedging properties, fair transmission allocation, and open access. Everything I saw, at least on the FERC front, had more of that tenor. But I don't know, David, did you have other?
I don't think we specified one was more important than the other. I mean, I have a view of what, which one was more important than the other, but I think we could all have different views. So I don't think we committed to having one as being more important than the other. So I don't think so.
I think, David, you're referring to more of like our orders from MRTU.
Yeah, I think kind of personally, I think hedging is sort of first and foremost, and everything else is a secondary thing. But I don't know that we've ever made that an official position anywhere. So,
thanks, David.
But if anyone, if I don't know, is that something we can discuss in this process? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, thanks, David.
I appreciate that context. That's interesting, David, because I would have ranked them actually kind of in the order that they're on the screen, but that's my personal opinion. So I look forward to that discussion. Thanks.
And that, yeah, that was just my personal view. That was not an ISO like official ranking or anything. So.
Oh,
Fair enough.
understood. Yeah, no, I appreciate your perspective. Thanks.
You know, I will follow up there too, at least in terms of that ground. I do think grounding on the goals is sort of like as we frame these out, I think the grounding on participants' feedback on what the goals and objectives should be would be important. I think as David alluded to, there's lots of ISO staff with lots of different opinions. I don't, and I think that a part of this working group process is like we're trying to really make sure that, as a part of a stakeholder-led initiative process, that we're understanding your feedback and perspectives going into it. So yeah, thanks Todd for bringing up that issue and sharing your thoughts. So, anyone else on the phone?
No more questions in queue.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and I would say David covered pretty well. Like my opening stuff was more my opening discussion was really more about the FERC. I think David, you covered the MRTU discussion well. If I were to sort of highlight it, it seemed like our basis and what we provided MRTU was really largely consistent with sort of the FERC precedent, those coming out of cases at the time, and so there wasn't a large gap between the basis and the rationale for the CRR design that we provided in 2006 versus the evolving FERC policy and the priorities that we'd seen in various cases. But yeah, love to hear areas that you all would like to hear more about in those discussions going forward. So yeah, with that, I'll turn it over to Hillary, and just to maybe ground everyone on the call, I've probably. Hillary really will be leading the policy development effort going forward at the ISO, and so yeah, please take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Hillary Staver, and so I'll be covering the next topic here, the next couple. As Partha mentioned up front, what we're doing here is a quick overview designed to help us illuminate where we might want to be spending more time in future meetings in the working group. So this is going to be a brief overview of the CRR program as it works today, and we welcome questions here. Also, questions that we can follow up with more in-depth discussion on in future meetings. Before we get into the structure of the program, very briefly, I want to touch on just the concept of congestion, what it is in an electricity market. And so, as you know, ISO's markets dispatch resources on least cost, but congestion arises when transmission limits prevent the lowest cost supply from moving freely to meet demand. And so what this can result in is different locational prices between where supply is being injected into the grid and where load is pulling it off. And this results in different locational prices. And what that can mean is that in aggregate, supply is paying more than demand is paying more than is being paid to supply. And this results in a pool of funding known as congestion rent. CRRs are a vehicle for which this money can be allocated back out into the market. So when we talk about a congestion revenue right as a product, these products have a number of characteristics that define them. And there is a counterpart to these programs in other ISOs around the country. In many cases, they're known as financial transmission rights. We refer to them as congestion revenue rights here, but the instrument enables holders of these rights to hedge their congestion risk in the day-ahead market. They're funded through congestion rent, and if we look at the diagram on the bottom right here, there are a number of components that define an individual CRR. So if we start on the left here, the source and sink. CRRs are associated with a path. A source is where energy is being injected onto the grid in the model, and the sink is where it's being withdrawn. If we move counterclockwise, we also have a CRR will have a megawatt quantity. We'll talk a little bit more in a second about how the quantity of CRRs that can be released is determined. Our program also runs separate on-peak and off-peak CRR types. So those run in parallel. There's a term. So CRRs can be monthly or seasonal, and for the allocations, which we'll talk about in a little more in a bit, those can also be bundled up into up to 10-year long-term CRRs. And then finally, you have the type. This is option or obligation. In most cases, most of the CRRs that our program works with are obligations. So when you think about an individual CRR as a product, each CRR will have each of these characteristics. Partha just touched a little bit on the principles behind this design. But primarily, they allow load-serving entities to hedge differences in locational marginal price. One thing that we saw on the bottom right of that slide, that last slide on the purpose, is part of the benefit of being able to hedge is to facilitate long-term contracting by load-serving entities. But also, non-load-serving entities, the program is open to non-load-serving entities as well to enable greater liquidity and access to hedges in the market. So let's talk a little bit about what determines which CRRs are released. Part of the administration of this program at the ISO is running a feasibility test, a power flow model that looks at the transmissions, that models the transmission system, looks at the capacity that is expected to be available in a given round, and that allows us to see what CRRs can be released and also what the nominal price of those CRRs is going to be. That modeling exercise looks at a variety of factors, including the configuration of the transmission system, the parameters and limits, and especially expected transmission outages that are going to be happening in the time frame of the CRR release. And this is an important one because to the extent that outages happen, if they are reflected in the model, then that helps the results of the CRR model converge to the day-ahead market results. Once we know what CRRs can be released in a given round, there are two different ways that CRRs can come to be held by CRR holders, by market participants. So the first round of this is allocations, which are free of cost. And apart from merchant transmission providers, the allocations are only for load-serving entities, mostly inside the CAISO balancing authority area, but there are cases in which LSEs outside the balancing area can also participate. And so LSEs are given an opportunity to nominate paths that they are interested in and receive those as an allocation free of charge. After the allocations have been completed, then the second piece of the distribution system is an auction. And so in an auction, any qualified entity can participate. You don't have to be a load-serving entity. In the auction, CRRs that were not allocated, as well as any allocated CRRs that the holder would like to sell in the auction, are made available. This can also, in addition to the auction, there's also a secondary trade system that can be used as well for CRRs to move between holders. And finally, I'm going to put up this, we have this graphic here. You can also find this, in the business practice manual on congestion revenue rights. And this just gives a flavor for the process that we run annually. So allocations and auctions are done on both a monthly and annual basis. The annual process is broken down into seasons. And you can see then on the top right, we also have in parallel with this regular cycle of auctions and allocations, the bilateral market, the secondary trading system that I just mentioned, and also load migration, because there is a CRR transfer process associated with when load migrates to a new load serving entity, the ability to get allocations does as well. That's a very high level overview. There are many more layers of detail that we could go into on this, and we can at future meetings. We also have Philip Roth here with us today from our CRR production team. And so with that, I will open it up for questions.
We do have 2 questions lined up on the WebEx. Let's go ahead and take Kyle Navis. Please be sure to introduce your name and title.
Yeah, hey everyone, this is Kyle Navis with the Public Advocate's Office. Commission.
Good morning.
Say a little bit more about the secondary trading system and how that.
We've lost your audio, Kyle. It's become very faint.
Better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Kyle Navis with Cal Advocates. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the secondary trading system, how that works, where that's housed.
David, would you like to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Well, I'll get started and maybe we can see if Philip needs to step in. But yeah, so I think going back to the start of CRR, there was the idea that there could be secondary trading. You know, so one way of trading off allocated CRRs was that you know an LSE could just sell them back into the auction. So that was one notion of kind of trading. But apart from that, there was a secondary registration system, the SRS, that was sort of just a way for parties to bilaterally trade CRRs amongst themselves, sort of outside, sort of you know on their own terms, whatever trading they wish to do, and then register those trades through the SRS, so the ISO would know, okay, you know, control of the CRR has changed, so we know who to pay, etc. So I think it's just parties make a deal, however they wish to make a deal, and then the transfer is registered on the SRS, and that's just, I think, an interface on the CRR system somewhere. And I assume it's just sort of a portal on the regular CRR interface somewhere. I don't know that there's anything more to say there. I don't know. Does that sound right to people who are more regularly interfacing with the CRR system? I assume that's.
This is Philip Roth here. I'll jump in. Yep. What you said is correct there, David. So yes, it's one of the pages within the CRR system that participants can utilize to transfer CRRs from one entity to another. So yeah, that's the short of it, I guess.
Sort of like Venmo for CRRs then, sounds like.
Somewhat, although the like any sort of financial transaction is outside of the CAISO CRR system. So if there's some sort of agreement that, you know, one entity is transferring to another and there's some sort of money involved with that, you know, that would be outside of the CAISO system. That would be, you know, between those two entities to figure out, but then the actual transfer of the CRRs is through the CAISO system.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. I think you said we had 2
Are
more
there any
in
questions?
the queue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go take Callie Wells. Go ahead, unmute Callie.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Quick question. Can you remind me, and at a high level at this point is totally fine, what the criteria or qualifications for an LSC outside the balancing area to get allocated CRs is?
Yeah, I can take that as well. There are those qualifications laid out in our tariff, and I'm just going to pull it up now so I don't misspeak on those, but the main sort of items that need to be met there are a showing of legitimate need. So the sources that are going to be utilized by that outside balancing authority area LSC, they have to show certain or attest to certain things that that would qualify for participation. And then the other big qualification is prepayment of the wheeling access charge or WAC. And then, yeah, there's more in our tariff section 36.9, but those are I think the two main ones. And I don't know, David, if you had anything to add there.
No, I think that, I mean, that's the high level. They just, unlike internal LSCs who just have a certain number of megawatts and they can kind of allocate whatever, they wish based on the number of megawatts they have eligible, OBALSIs have to kind of have more concrete showings of why they need it, where they need it, et cetera. And then the WAC prepayment is, I think, probably pretty significant because they have to kind of put money up front, which LSCs, internal LLCs do not.
Okay, so if I'm understanding all that, essentially if they have maybe a generating source inside the balancing area that they're using to serve their load, they can show, the criteria and prepay the WAC, and then they'll get allocated CRRs. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, at a high level, and just to clarify the last part of your statement, they would, if they meet all the criteria, they would have eligible quantity that they could nominate. So they're not guaranteed to be allocated. They would still go through the allocation process and have to go through SFT, just like any other nomination.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And they get their WAC the WAC is refundable. So if they don't get the CRRs awarded that they wish to get, they're not like forfeiting all that wheeling access charge. So it's not like they're at risk of losing that money.
Yeah. And maybe Kelly, this is Partha, if you're still there. I think that the kind of like one of the areas that we thought about for education was kind of a review of the history of that kind of the OBALSI process for and what that ability is for outside entities to obtain CRRs. So if there is a desire for more detailed examples or us to go through the have a recap of the history information of those processes, I think love to hear your feedback. If you want to discuss it now or in comments, that'd be great. But thanks for flagging that, Kelly.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was just trying to remind myself what those qualifications were. So thank you.
We do have Alex Dugood lined up, but if there's any questions in the room, let me know so we can make sure we take those. Let's go ahead and mute Alex Dugood. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, everyone. This is Alex from PG&E. I had a question about the secondary registration system. I think in the BPM, it states that they're limited to CRRs that don't extend beyond a year. And I'm just wondering why that limit is, or if I'm misinformed about that. And if so, then can two participants basically exchange or trade long-term CRRs if they wished? Thank you.
I can speak to the first part of the question. So I can confirm they are limited to 1 year ahead. As far as the why behind that, we may need to follow up unless David's aware. I think that may just be more of a processing sort of implementation issue rather than a policy, but I couldn't really speak to it.
Thank you.
I don't know. My guess is the same, that it might have very well could have been just a system limitation from 16, 17 years ago. I mean, I don't know, honestly, and I don't know if that's been an issue. I mean, maybe I'd be interested to hear if any CRR participants have found that to be a problem, or have you found that to be a problem, or were you just curious?
Well, I think It's interesting that you say that. There's what I'm hearing is that there's really not a good reason why it's restricted to a year. So maybe just lifting that so that participants can actually then exchange CRRs with tenors longer than a year out. Because I mean, in the spirit of the SRS is that you want liquidity right among participants, and so if we can't exchange or trade or acquire CRRs from other market participants, with CRRs more than a year out tenor, fine, but is there a reason for that? So, and if there's no good reason, then maybe we can just lift that and then there'll be more liquidity. So that was my only 2 cents. Maybe is that something that we can look at down the line, where one of the things that we can add to the agenda.
Thank you, Alex. I was going to say, yeah, it sounds like this is something that might be a good candidate for some further discussion and follow-up.
All right,
Appreciate
well,
that.
we've discovered the first piece of low-hanging fruit this morning.
All right. Any further questions on the phone or in the room?
We do have one more in the phone, but if there's a question in the room, let us take that one.
I don't believe we have any at this time.
Great. Jordan Miner, I think he added his question to chat, but we'll unmute him. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. This is Jordan Miner from the CPUC Energy Division. I just had a quick background question. Does CAISO know how significant the external LLCs are in the CRR process? Like how much do they make up and how much trading are they doing? Or if they could provide that analysis for us. Thank you.
Can I make sure could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I fully I fully followed it. What was the analysis you're looking for?
Yeah, how significant the external LLCs are in the CRR process?
Okay, you're wanting particularly the external LLCs, not participants.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take that one. Historically, it's been a very, very minor to non-existent sort of impact to the market. As far as you're talking about the OBALZ, like outside balancing authority or outside balance.
Yeah, I'm just puzzled by the external LLCs parts versus the internal LLCs, and I was just wanting to know how significant that is. But it sounds like the external LLCs aren't very significant at all.
Correct. Yeah, up until now and historically, it's been a very minor, almost non-existent amount of megawatts.
Thank you.
I think, as part of this, going back to some of the MRTU documentation, I think there was, in that stakeholder process way back, there was sort of some ease at that time that the concept of allocating CRRs to external LSCs, some of the stakeholders, California stakeholders, were kind of uncertain about whether that was a good idea, whether they liked that. And so that's part of why, when we were in response to Callie's question earlier, some of the restrictions and requirements on those out of balancing authority area LSCs, why they have to meet that higher threshold was just to make sure they really need it, because there was the countervailing concern of, for open access principles and so on, could we just say they don't get CRRs at all? And I think there was a concern about just taking that position. So I think the idea was they should be entitled to get allocated CRRs, but we were also entitled to sort of have a higher threshold of a showing of need and so on. And so I think that was the balance that was struck. And I think that because of that the showing of need and the prepayment of WACC, I think, what we've seen is that the outside LLCs have probably, not availed themselves of that opportunity to a very great extent over time.
All right.
Hi, this is quick sound check. You can hear me. Okay. This is Rahul from AES. Quick question. Is based on the slide, are the auction CRRs available for 10 years, or it's only the allocation?
The 10-year duration is only for the allocation.
Is CAISO looking for feedback if there is an opportunity to have auction for 10 years? And this is coming from those, IPPs who have long-term contracts and looking to hedge long-term. Is that something that's on the table, or?
If you have feedback, yeah, we would be interested in further discussion. Arthur, were you going to say something?
No, that's it. And this is a scoping discussion, trying to hear people's problem statements, challenges, and what items we should have in scope. And so I certainly think that, I would love to hear more from you about, there might be an opportunity to present, to explain sort of the current challenges that you all are facing with that design, at least for, to start with, just for a common understanding. So yeah, thanks, Rahul.
Thanks.
We have another comment in the room.
Yeah, just wanted to second that. There's been a few comments already about auction structure and about possibly having more auctions for longer term products that could give us better price formation, price discovery in the market, better reflect outages as they change over time and projects as they evolve. And that's certainly something that we'd like to just second some of the comments that have already been in the room that we'd like to discuss further.
Thank you.
Thank you. And could you state your name and affiliation again? Thank you.
Sorry, this is Aaron Black from Saracen Energy.
Appreciate it.
Do we have any other questions in the room at this time? Any further?
We'll have no questions in queue. Nope.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I think that wraps up this segment. And at this time, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Dinesh. One moment here.
So I might interrupt. There's a public service. I just got a note from our security that there's a black Hyundai Kona that has their lights on. I thought it might be coming from this room. So they had asked me to reach out and see if there's anyone in this room. I'm seeing no one for this room, so I apologize for that interruption. Well, yeah, it's a.
We do have two questions just came up from the WebEx team.
I hope they're not related to the Honda Kona, but we'll welcome them.
Okay, call-in user, I think this is like other individuals just spoke earlier, so let's go ahead and mute that caller and user. Niam, I think she might be double muted, just to make sure. Go ahead. Let's test.
Can you hear me okay? This is Noha
Yes,
from ATI. Yeah, I just wanted to, I was trying to get in earlier. I wanted to support some of the comments about sort of exploring really more effective hedging, and auction structure and auction duration is certainly part of that. But I think another piece of that is the hourly structure of the product. So having things like a weekend peak product like PJM recently implemented and ERCOT has had for a long time, just things to consider that way. If you're a solar developer, for example, you don't have to buy every single weeknight just to hedge your weekend sun hours.
And do we have a second question?
Justin, let's go ahead. Justin, you may be double muted just on your headset. Try again. Justin Panu, I'll send him a chat to make sure he's able to connect with us. Ahmed, if you can go ahead and unmute the next caller, user 7.
This is Seth with VTOL. I just had a quick follow-on to some of the questions about the SRS, the secondary system. If we take a look at that, we should look at the liquidity of it. I have you note that those are bilateral arranged transactions, and I don't think I'm going to go off on a limb here and say there's very, very, very few transactions that are actually executed over that system, which gets basically to the point that bilateral markets really don't foster liquidity needed for nodal market contracts. So I just wanted to make that point, and that if we do look at the SRS, we need to also look at how often it trades. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
Dave Peck, next in queue, and then Dan Williams is after that. Let's go ahead and Dave.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. This is Dave Peck from Public Advocate's Office. Really appreciate this this working group, and this is a very important topic. And so we appreciate all this discussion. On slide 14, you had mentioned that the CRR auctions were designed for load serving entities and suppliers for hedging congestion costs. And the question is, the CRR auctions have been going on for many years now. Have you done analysis to determine are the auctions operating as they were originally designed, or is the participation of like load serving entities and suppliers, is that a robust or is the auctions operating differently than you intended initially?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, I think that really is maybe kind of one of the foundational questions of this working group structure. And that there has been a variety of analysis performed. We'll get to a little bit around what's been sort of performed to date. Clearly, the Department of Market Monitoring also has their own analysis in terms of how CRRs are being used. But I think part of the discussion we're really looking to have here is, what analysis I have here today is like, what's that scoping exercise in terms of other ways that we can sort of best answer that question through analysis or through data. My own take is that there certainly is not an easy story to tell to date based on analysis of, whether or not the practices are meeting their intended goals. There's obviously plenty of data out there to have some opinions about the kind of our ability to meet those sort of foundational drivers. But if there is more that you think needs to be done, Dan, love to hear it. How we can be responsive to that going forward.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
And let's go ahead and take Dan's question.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, this is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. So just wanted to provide some support for having future sessions on the OBALSI functionality, kind of its current practice and its utility under future EDAM space. And my understanding is that the OBALSI functionality kind of confers obligation CRRs that over their term, by the way it's set up, are generally counter to prevailing flow. And given that it's kind of by default, the CAISO, the OBALSI would be for exporting from the CAISO. The CAISO system is on balance net importing, and so those obligation CRs end up being highly uneconomic, especially when you take into account the WAC prepay. So I think it'd be good to kind of look into that and pair that up with some of the comments that have been made around the creation of CRR products that are maybe more tailored to different periods of the day. When looking at that too, I think we should analyze kind of external LSEs, CRR usage outside of the OBALSI program and look at kind of where either external LSEs or marketers that are serving external LSEs or selling on to external LSEs through exporting from the CAISO system, like how those entities are acquiring rights and during which specific periods they're doing that through the auction to maybe get a better picture for how, if we do want to change the OBALSI functionality to be more useful to external entities, kind of all the different ways that maybe those external entities are using CRRs today that could be done under OBALSI if the OBALC was a more functional program.
Thank you, Dan. I see that we do have some multiple parties interested in this functionality. It sounds like this would be an excellent topic to highlight for further attention in the upcoming meetings. Did anyone on our panel here have anything else they want to say in response at the moment? All right. Do we have any further questions in the queue at this time?
We do have Justin. He was able to connect with us, so he will ask his question now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Hello, Justin.
He said it's not working, so we will get his question through chat at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. And we will have some open discussion at the end here. So Justin, if you have any, if you want to bring it up at that time too, that's an opportunity. With that, let's move along to the next section here. So having discussed a little bit about how the program works, we're going to do a brief overview. This is really meant to be kind of a preview of what is possible through the working group process. We're going to do a brief preview of some existing analysis on results in the program since we did our last round of changes in 2019, and talk a little bit about any comments folks have on future analysis that would be interesting. So that I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dinesh Dasgupta.
Hi, everyone. This is Dinesh from the ISO policy staff. So just to get started, making sure that we level set on definitions. First off, there's a difference between auction efficiency and revenue adequacy. So looking at auction efficiency first, it compares the auction revenue with congestion payouts for auction CRRs. The difference between the two is that orange bar, which is labeled right now excess payouts. And that is the greater that bar, the lower the auction efficiency in that metric. Importantly, this metric does not reflect anything else in terms of value of money over time, any inherent risk premium associated with hedging instruments. It is strictly looking at the two, the revenue and the payout. In comparison, when we talk about revenue adequacy, that's comparing the total congestion revenue with total payout for both auction and allocated CRRs. Ideally, if the CRR market is reflecting a complete convergence with the day-ahead market results, then there will be no revenue inadequacy, and it would be there would be 100% revenue adequacy as a metric. So looking at this chart now as well, if the market has over 100% revenue adequacy, then there's the congestion revenue outweighs the CRR payout obligations, combined both auction and allocation, meaning that more opportunities to hedge could have been released. And if it's the other way around, then there may be too many options to hedge may have been released. One other thing to note with revenue adequacy is that this term has stayed consistent between pre-2019 and post-2019 because this is referring to nominal. So in that sense, we can take a look between the years before and the years after, and we'll get into the pro rata discussion afterwards. Okay, any questions at this time?
J.K. Wang, let's go ahead and take your question.
This is J.K. Wang from PG&E. Just a quick clarification question here. So when we look at the auction here, it does consider the auction revenue, but when we look at the total revenue adequacy, the auction revenue itself is out of picture. So we only consider congestion rents without auction revenue. Is that because the auction revenue is something directly paying to the sellers?
That is correct. So that auction revenue has been dealt with before we get to that question about where the congestion rents are going.
Okay, but the congestion rents is something that's paid out to paid out to the system, but auction revenue is something to the sellers. I see. Okay, thank you very much.
So another way of
Next
thinking.
Don, do you want
Yeah, this is Don Trethway from GDS Associates. I think the auction revenues, some of it's paid to auction participants that are selling, but it's also paid generally to measured demand as part of the balancing account, which gets back to, I think, the issue that DMM keeps bringing up is that there's a sort of, they've in essence sold them. They do get the revenues for them, but they've.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. There's sort of two inputs into the CR auction. One is based on sort of bids by participants. It could be reselling their allocated rights. It could be selling additional counterflow CRRs, and then there are in effect transmission that's being offered that was not allocated, that's being sort of provided by the ISO into the auction process, and that the revenues go back to different parties based on those factors.
So I think I guess is the point here that the amount of auction revenues that is paid to measured demand is sort of overlapping, is basically going to the same place that if there's excess congestion rents above what's paid out to CRRs, it's sort of money going to the same place. And so it should be accounted for in talking about revenue and adequacy. Is that what you're saying?
This is Donald. That might be, no, I think the way you're doing this is correct. You keep them completely separate.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You don't want to, the fact that there were auction revenues doesn't mean that offsets revenue inadequacy.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah, and also the idea is that the auction revenues are going towards the, they're being paid for CR allocations, right? So in some ways it's an offset there, right? Where the auction revenues are already dealt with, and the CR payouts are the CR payouts. Moving on to the next question or comment.
Well, maybe if I had a suggestion, I think some of them can be going to I'd recommend just finishing going through your presentation and then circling back to questions. I think some of it might be answered as you go through the numbers.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that, Abraham. So this is now specifically looking at revenue inadequacy, right? So we're looking at the congestion, we're looking at the payouts in comparison to the congestion rents coming in. So from 2019 through 2024, system level revenue inadequacy has been at 81% with a total shortfall of $684 million, or about $101 million per year. The ISO distributes the inadequacy by calculating each CR's contribution to the shortfall by constraint, and that's where each CR's type is not considered when calculating revenue inadequacy contributions. So then moving on to the next slide. Pro rata adjustments reduce payouts to congestion revenue rights, improving the auction efficiency from 50% to 65%. Note that we have the 2017 and 2018 bar here with the ratio to notional. So you can see that over time, the notional has stayed relatively consistent, maybe with a slight improvement from the other metrics and the other changes that were conducted in the 2018-2019 process. However, that gap between the notional and the pro rata is showing that it's showing that difference that we're seeing when we're allocating to allocating that difference in adequacy to load rather than to supply. So with that, let's take the questions, and then after that, we can open this up to a broader discussion about what analysis you would like to see in terms of what's important. And while we're conducting that analysis, what metrics do you see as critical to understanding what is going on in these markets and how we should be looking to change the markets moving forward in this initiative?
And if you mind, Dinesh, I'll make one more sort of feedback and love to get people's perspectives on is that, obviously some of these what we're really highlighting is that, we had an initiative, we had two initiatives, track, CR track 1A and 1B that went into effect in 2019. And what we have seen is, some impact associated with that, and that a number of participants have brought up sort of, there are direct impacts on auction efficiency that have likely come about, but there's also a change in terms of like who's being allocated those revenues, what the impacts are, as well as a change to the revenue obviously calculation. So I think part of what has been requested us in terms of analysis is wanting to dive into a little more on the root causes of some of this, trying to understand, I think that some people have kind of offered up the idea of like, one, understand on a flow gate by flow gate basis, sort of where, to the degree that there are sort of certain drivers of either, particularly I'll say on revenue inadequacy, what was the cause of that? Was that something where it was, a late outage submission? Was this really driven by an outage that was submitted but might not have been, fully modeled as out? If it was like, we'll say, for example, a 5-day outage within a month, how was that treated? Was that part of the impact? So I think that that's sort of what we've heard so far in terms of the analysis is sort of wanting, we've seen changes have happened from track 1A and 1B. But I think that there's been a desire to really understand and be rooted in, what is that kind of the root cause, because in effect the high level picture, does tell a story. It does tell a story in terms of like what the impact is to CRR holders as a whole, to LLCs as a whole from these changes, but trying to really be grounded in terms of what those sort of underlying factors that drove the inadequacy is something that we've heard the feedback on, and to date, I think that's what we're proceeding to do, sort of that more detailed analysis for the future working group discussions in terms of understanding those drivers. So, yeah, but love to open up to others to understand any feedback or questions.
We do have about 4 attendees who have raised their hand. Let's go ahead and take Callie Wells, and then we'll take Jay Case after.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. First of all, I'll second that. I think really getting a good grasp on what the drivers are of the continued underfunding is going to be key, and probably one of the first things that we would ask for as we continue down these conversations. But that aside, I actually had 2 quick clarifying questions on, I have one on slide 21 and one on slide 20. So on 21, the gray bar is showing your auction revenues, and then your teal and blue bars are showing your CR payments, notional and after the underfunding. Are these payments only to auction CRRs? I just want to, I'm assuming they are, because it looks like you're trying to show the auction efficiency ratio here.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for confirming that. And then back on slide 20, I did notice, and I don't expect you guys to have an answer today, but it looked like all of a sudden in 2021, you see kind of that gap between the congestion rents and the CR payments increase. 19 and 2020 seem to be, pretty close to one another. Do you guys have any sense, and maybe this is getting back at the driver question, understanding if there was some systematic change that took place all of a sudden in 2021 that is now maybe contributing to this larger gap, I think would be really useful to know. So again, not expecting you guys to know that answer today, but if you guys can keep that in mind for the next iteration, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Callie. That's a great question. And just to note that there's significant variation in both how much congestion rents there are and also the level of outages and other factors that may influence both bars in each individual year. So with looking back, we've got 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024 now. We can do some more analysis into looking at what the drivers are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that something was structurally changed in 2021 that we're seeing this additional variance and between the two bars.
Fair point. And maybe it's something like one of those factors all of a sudden had a larger impact between 2020 and the rest of the years. But yeah, just putting that on your radar. Thanks.
Let's go ahead and take the question
in the room, and then we'll go back to the ones on WebEx. Aaron, go ahead.
This is Aaron Black from Saracen Energy. So it's been brought up a few times already, the idea of benchmarking against other ISOs. MISO and PJM have had their bouts with underfunding as well, and we're able to kind of get it under control in a year or two. And it's certainly not gone away. SPP is dealing with some right now, so it's always an issue in this space. But have you all done any benchmarking with, say, PJM or MISO to really dig down and have an open dialogue with them about what was causing it, how they solved it, and some ideas for you all to implement? Has that happened? That's my first question. Then my second question is about constraint level funding allocation. So to my knowledge, no other ISO does it this way. And so I was just curious as to what CAISO's thought process was in implementing it. It's fairly complicated and complex to both execute and to analyze from the CRR holder's perspective. So I'm just wondering, what was the thought process? What's the advantage to doing it that way?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take your first question first. The answer is yes. Okay. I think certainly we've had a series of meetings with different RTOs and market participants just to understand their practices to date, and there's coordination that goes on. There's obviously very different designs and challenges with the different structures that are being set up, as well as I think probably different ways of thinking about those challenges too. And so I think that I note as well, there's been a number of studies that I think MISO as well as PJM have commissioned. I forget the entity's name. It's the London, I apologize. Yeah, London Economics. Yeah, that I thought was at least a good starting point for us to at least understand sort of what's been done to date. And I think that if you'd like to see more of that, I think we can have that in a future meeting, because I think grounding on that is right. And then there's at least your second question. Maybe I'll turn to David, who was here as a part of that process. There was obviously a lot of documentation in terms of the rationale for going for the track. I think you're highlighting at least particularly the track 1B changes to the allocation processes. But David, do you want to sort of elucidate sort of the precedent we provided?
Well, the rationale at the time, I'm thinking back, I think the idea was when we had full funding, the revenue inadequacy was covered by uplift charges to load. And I think that was, the level of those uplifts, I think, were looked at as too high and inequitable. And so the scaling was a way to get that under control. And there's concern that that was not an equitable way of dealing with the issue. So we went to the scaling. That was the rationale that we had for doing that. I think it still holds, but I think the idea of what we're talking about now is, okay, well, let's get at the drivers of why is there that revenue adequacy issue in the first place, and maybe let's solve that instead of trying to figure out how to allocate. Does it go to load? Does it go to CRR hold, et cetera? So I think that's what we're trying to solve now. But I think the in 2019, 2018, the idea is, well, let's not assign those costs to load anymore. And I think the idea was to come back and address revenue adequacy. And I think it's just unfortunately taken longer than ideally it would have to get to this conversation today.
And just to clarify on that point, I certainly wasn't suggesting that a fully funded model is to return to that. I think most ISOs have moved past that, save New York. But I was just more talking about, okay, now that you're not going to be fully funded, there's different configurations of how you can allocate it. And the constraint level one is one approach. There are others. And so I certainly understand why you moved away from just straight uplift to load and fully funded model. But that particular way of allocating was what I was more curious about.
I see. Yeah. I can't recall what, other alternatives, I think, right, you get the sort of idea, what we were trying to get away from, and then why we went to that sort of constraint by constraint disaggregation versus some other, I don't remember what other options we really pursued. I agree. Yes, it is complicated for sure.
Anybody else on the phone?
Yes, we can go ahead and take JK. Let's go ahead there.
Hi, thank you very much. This is JK Wang from PG&E. First, the question is on slide 20. So I'm sorry, I'm still trying to understand the metrics here. The revenue inadequacy is 81%. Is the number higher? That means that we have better adequacy or not? Like, for example, my interpretation was, if the rent is higher than payments, then, or the same as the payments, then you have the sufficiency, right? The way it's described is revenue inadequacy. So just try to understand, do we consider a higher inadequacy as a better or worse?
I think probably the easy answer is the higher inadequacy. Like the percentages here are really sort of comparing the CRR payments. So what would be the CRR nominal payments based on just a straight value of the CRRs coming out of the auction process versus the revenues received in the day-ahead market. And so I think this is really comparing those two. So ideally, we'd get to 100%, where it'd be, you'd have a perfect matching, like this is in a hypothetical world that we don't expect to exist or will exist. If you had that perfect mapping and matching of the day-ahead model and the CRR model, and the revenues match perfectly, you get to 100% adequacy.
Okay, so 100% is actually an adequate condition. So it's more like a revenue adequacy instead of inadequacy. Okay, got you. Thank you. That's really helpful. And then this is just corresponding to the metric presented in slide 19 on the right. Is that right? So we don't actually consider the auction revenue in the gray bar here. Is that right?
That's correct. The auction revenue, like the auction revenues, are not a factor when we're talking about the revenue adequacy of the CRRs. That's just really a comparison of the what was expected to be the nominal payout for the CRRs based on their value versus the day-ahead congestion revenues, not factoring in the auction revenues.
Okay, thank you, Professor. That's really helpful. And I have another question on slide 21. My apologies if you have already explained that before. I wonder if someone can explain very quickly why the pro rata CR payment can improve the auction efficiency.
I think it probably is a way a different way to look at auction efficiency. So I think it's really I think this is not really trying to just describe it as quote unquote improving auction efficiency. It's just acknowledging the fact that there was, I think there was a number of moving parts that happened in track 1A and 1B that included, some changes that would improve the revenue that, for example, the timing of the submission of outages that would likely improve the revenue improve the auction efficiency and the consistency of modeling. And this is really just comparing what the values are of the CRRs from a notional perspective versus the payments. And that what really changed as a part of it was sort of both an improvement in the modeling function as well as who's allocated some of those underfunding costs associated with transmission D rates, where that underfunding isn't going directly to load, but now the CRR holder. And so that's what's really changing the impact to load associated with these processes. And so, yeah, I think that's probably at least how I would describe it, is really that change in the funding is really changing how much load serving entities would be sort of impacted by the differences. So.
And just to add to that as well, auction efficiency is referring to the comparison between, on the numerator side, your auction revenues compared to your denominator side, your CRR payments. So if you are using a notional CRR payment value, you have a larger denominator, which means that you have a lower auction efficiency. Versus if you're using the pro rata CRR payment, you have a smaller denominator, which means you have a higher efficiency.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Let's go ahead and take Abram Klein. He had a question, maybe from his hand was lowered earlier, but let's go ahead and take it for this portion. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay? This is Abram Klein from Appian Way Energy. And on slide 19, I just wanted to make a quick comment to point out something as part of the analysis. The comment about revenue adequacy is about how well CLRR processes converge to the day-ahead market. And I think there's an implied assumption there that the IFM is always correct, and the CRRs are designed to sort of meet what's there. And, you know, when we're talking about revenue adequacy, or was it outages or transmission derates? One of the things we found from the previous effort to address this last year was there actually can be problems in the IFM or the day-ahead market that are leading to revenue adequacy, where the reason for the undercollection of congestion rents is unrelated to differences in transmission modeling between the CRR model and the day-ahead model. That model can be the same, but in that case, because of the shift factor threshold cutoff for load aggregate points, the load simply wasn't paying certain congestion, so load prices were lower. And given the amount of revenue inadequacy we continue to see in this market, I think it's important when we do the root cause analysis, and I know that's coming as part of the CalASA paper, to really look carefully at what that is, because often it can be something that's going on in the day-ahead market software that's totally unrelated to the CRRs and the differences in transmission capacity. And then, you know, it just raised the question about cost causation and how those kind of things should be allocated, or some other fix to the market to ensure that the congestion rents are appropriately accounted for and that prices are correct in terms of reflecting the congestion that's taking place on the system. Thanks.
We can't hear the boardroom if you're speaking. Hillary, just confirming audio. I can't hear you. Nope. Yelena, can you go check on the monitor to make sure we can hear them? No audio is coming through on my WebEx. Ahmed, can you confirm that as well?
I'm not receiving any audio.
And thank you everyone for those who are on the call. We're still working to make sure we can connect with audio on the boardroom. We can go ahead and take another question in the WebEx queue. Let's take caller user 14. And yes, Abraham, we did hear your comments. My team wasn't able to respond. Thank you. Calling user 14 571242. You're unmuted. We can't hear you as well, so just making sure. Your phone line.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead and
Okay.
ask your question and introduce yourself as well, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, this is Noah Hassan again on behalf of ETI. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I sort of heard of themes throughout. One, I guess I want to go back to sort of your 81% revenue inadequacy and just clarify that basically means that folks are getting 19% of the contract value based off of the MCP and day ahead. Generally, taking aside the constraint-specific allocation.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, our team is just listened to your question, so we'll be taking a quick break and responding to your question in a few minutes. We want to make sure audio is connecting, but we got your question, so that'll be the first one we speak on in a moment.
Okay.
But thank you. So for those who are on the line, we'll be coming back in like a few minutes. Let's target 10:52 a.m. Pacific time, and then we'll go back to this question, and then we'll follow with the WebEx. So do not lower your hands if you have a question. We'll come back. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are back from our break. We will go ahead and resume with our slide deck as well with the call that we had earlier today. So caller 14 571242. If you may repeat your question for the team. Thank you so much.
Yeah. My question was just going back to your 81% revenue inadequacy slide. I just want to highlight that basically means that folks are getting 19%. I mean, if you just go off of that slide, obviously there's the cost allocation piece of it, but I just sort of wanted to clarify that because I know some folks were sort of confused about the higher number versus the lower number. But basically, the inadequacy number is the number that is being taken out of the pot in theory. Am I understanding that correctly?
Thank you for your question. Let me see if the room is able to answer.
Okay.
We cannot hear you, Partha.
Can you hear me?
Who is that coming from?
Brenda? This is Don Treadway.
Yes, Don, we can hear you.
I know, I do talk loud, but my mic actually works.
Okay, perfect. We'll take your mic. Thanks, everyone, for your patience.
This is a surprising outcome to but we're And I apologize. So folks can't hear me now. So it was just really just the podium.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. I apologize, Nick. Can you repeat? I was going to ask. Can you repeat the ending of your question one more time? I'm not sure I fully understood your question around the revenue adequacy.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand it clearly. The 81% slide, let's just sort of assume that's like applying to one market participant. We're not going to worry about sort of the constraint cost allocation piece. Just so that I make sure I understand, when you're saying there's an inadequacy of 81%, meaning if I've entered into a contract and I experience the general inadequacy, I'm only getting 19%.
Yeah, but I think that's a fair way to look at it. So the inadequacy. Okay. We're talking about revenue inadequacy. We're talking about the difference between what would be the nominal payout to the CRRs versus the actual funding level. And so, like, if we look at the pre-track 1A, 1B, we're talking about that inadequacy. That was the amount that was allocated to LSEs. Now that's what we look at as would be on a constraint basis, the targeted shortfall to the CRR payments. And so I think that's what we're talking about, revenue inadequacy in those numbers. And so there still can be improvements in it in terms of the modeling improvements. Likely have lowered the number, lowered that impact, but also it has changed the nature of the CRR hedges as well as who's bearing that risk associated with that impact. So.
Yeah, one thing I think, a couple of things. One thing that would be interesting for CAISO to take a look at is the number of market participants that are going negative. So meaning they bought a contract for $10 and the congestion went to 15. And so they would expect, you know, a $5 profit. And then rather than just getting underfunded and only getting $1 of that, if it was just rounding to 20%, they're actually owing the ISO money. So it's going negative on them. Because we've heard a lot of concern about that from the hedging community. And then the other piece that I think will be interesting for the education piece during your workshop is I think that sometimes we conflate two buckets of funds. The first being the bucket of the MCP, so the total money sort of generated in the auction, that pot of dollars versus the day ahead revenue pot of dollars. Because I think sometimes I've heard some folks sort of allude to the fact that maybe prices are not where they would like them to be in the MCP, and they think that's causing underfunding. So just kind of like maybe providing some education on separation of those two buckets might be helpful.
No, those are good points. Certainly, one of the topics we planned on covering in more detail was some of those examples on that reversal where based on the underfunding allocation, there's actually a reverse from what people were expecting to be a payment to what was actually a charge in the end, and some of the implications to that. So I think that's a great suggestion to provide those numbers, and appreciate your other feedback too. We'll certainly take that into consideration in terms of areas we can provide education on.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to go to one more slide too, I think this might have been as well. We want to go to slide 21. I think that we can maybe provide a little more elucidation. I think we're one of the, when we were benchmarking other markets and like what they reported on, I think we were fairly unique in our description. Revenue inadequacy was a fairly common and consistent frame, at least in terms of people understood what the impact was associated with the modeling differences. Inadequacy was caused. The notion of auction efficiency and describing sort of the price paid in the auction versus what the notional and then ultimate value of the CRR is after that pro rata occurred. This is sort of kind of a unique feature of the ISO in terms of based on that track 1B change. And so I think that at least maybe a little more education in terms of kind of the background in terms of those changes that happened in 1A and 1B, and that when we're describing what the auction efficiency as we're measuring is that percent difference between the auction value that was paid for the CRs
versus the notional value versus the pro rata value, and what that efficiency metric is, I think would be worth having more of a discussion on. And I think the DMM in particular has, within their report, a number of different ways to look at those measures of auction efficiency and performance in that context. So, yeah, I think that we can take that feedback and look at it more. But I know there's a couple questions on the phone. I'd love to get to those quickly. I'd also like to highlight, I want to make sure we have enough time for going through the problem statements that we have to date. We have a few presenters who have, and if you're asking why you weren't called to be a presenter, as I said, as I think I indicated before, we basically reached out to the people who had comments in the catalog and wanted to give them an opportunity to represent their positions. So maybe we'll try to get through the callers really quickly, and then I'll turn it back to Hillary to sort of provide some of that grounding on the problem statements. But yeah, I see. I don't know our communication ability. I know I can. Should we open up Doug's line, Doug Boccioni?
Let's go ahead and unmute Doug, and then we'll take another question.
Hi, this is Doug Boccioni for the Bay Area Municipal Transmission Group. Can you go back to slide 20? I think I have a slightly different interpretation compared to the last discussion. I don't think this means that CRR holders only got 19% of the value. I think we handed out more money than we collected by 19%. So yeah, they got 80, we were short 19% of day-ahead revenues, congestion revenues, to pay the CRR obligations that we had. So I interpret this to be we've allocated and auctioned more CRRs than the full network model revenues supported. And I think I think you said earlier, you want to be closer to 100%. And I think the paper says if it's more than 100%, it means there was more hedging opportunities that could have been met if we allocated and auctioned more. But I think the corollary to that is we're consistently allocating and auctioning more CRRs than the system really can support.
Yeah.
So that
I think you're just, if I wasn't clear, at least what I heard, Doug, was, I think you're correct. I think that at least what I was maybe describing was the difference of that we have a difference between the CRR auction and what is sort of being auctioned off via the CRR mechanism, and then we are facing an underfunding because the day-ahead market is different. The impact of that shortfall is now going back to CRR, going back to CRR holders as a part of that Track 1B reform. So that's a little, I think your description was right on in terms of like that being that foundational difference of kind of the description of it being a kind of the auction selling more rights than we have once we get to the day-ahead market. So
yeah, and just to be clear, it's really allocating and selling, right? That's
right.
Combined, and I think this chart would look different if we didn't have the auction. If we only looked at the allocation, it would be closer to parity, closer to 100%. But and then the second comment I wanted to make was on the auction efficiency. So the next slide, I think in the discussion paper there was a statement that the optimal auction efficiency will always be less than 100%, and I think that really should be clarified, because it's like on average you'd expect it to be less than 100%. But I think there'd be some months where you would expect that the auction participants overpaid for the CRRs. They paid more than they got. And I think, but the reality is that very, very, very rarely happens. almost always were, even on a monthly basis, the auction revenues are much lower than the payouts to the buyers of the auction CRRs. And that's why you see this big gap and, you know, such low auction efficiency. And there was a statement in the discussion paper that if we didn't have the clawback, you know, that was implemented in 2019, the efficiency would still be around 50%. And which I think is telling. I think that says that the other measures that were implemented in 2019 didn't really fix the problem. You know, they helped, they got us in the right direction. But if we didn't have the clawback, it would look like it looked before 2019. And I think there's been a lot of comments. The clawback is problematic, right? It's very difficult for parties to have the, you know, predict what the value is going to be, and some of it goes away and it can reverse. But I think if we sort of step back, one of the things we need to address in this initiative is that we still have a problem where we're allocating and auctioning more CRRs than the system can support. And in the auction in particular, people are able to consistently, month after month, year after year, buy CRRs for a significant discount to their value. And if they were actually buying these CRRs as hedges, you'd actually expect them to pay more than they were worth. And we see that the generators who participate in the auctions, you know, kind of on average overpay. You know, they're hedging, but the reality is most of the auction participants are not hedging. They're you know, consistently able to make a significant profit in the auction. And I think the DMM proposal would be a significant step to address that problem.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, appreciate your comments. And just as a clarification, when we look at that chart, there's sort of two dotted lines. The one in purple is sort of comparing that auction efficiency ratio just based on the notional value. And the second one in red is comparing the auction efficiency once accounting for the proration. And so sort of comparing the ratio of auction revenues to the final payout. So yeah, that's at least how we were trying to describe it in red. But yeah, appreciate your feedback, Doug. So, yeah, should we jump to the next caller, Kyle?
We can go ahead and mute Kyle Navis from the Cal Advocates CPC.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Kyle Navis, Cal Advocates, and mostly just echoing Doug's second point there. I agree that you'd expect to see those ratios up closer to 100 or even over 100 sometimes. And so I guess my question is, has there ever been a year where the ratio was over 100? And if not, has it ever happened on a monthly level?
We can provide that granularity in future working groups. There certainly has been different, the fluctuations by month look different. And so I think that we can, fair feedback. I think we can provide that in the future. So yeah, thanks Kyle.
And definitely there's also some, can you hear me from this mic, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Good to know. There's also, in comparison to other markets as well, there are some years that other markets have over 100% in these metrics and have, and that also depends on how things are, how outages are modeled and how all their models are doing. We'll definitely look into it and we'll report back soon.
Okay, thank you.
John, we'll have John go next. If you wouldn't mind saying your affiliation to.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, this is John Putz from the Energy Authority. I guess I I am just, I know that, you know, a lot of smart people come up with these metrics, but I guess I don't totally understand. You know, if I think of if I'm a load serving entity, you know, I'm paying the congestion rent. I'm receiving allocations for which I get, you know, congestion payouts. And then I'm also getting some allocation from auction revenues. So like for a, you know, a net basis, I would think you'd kind of want to look at the sum of those things. And I guess I'm not clear why that's not the sort of correct metric versus the things you're showing.
Can you describe it again, of what the?
Well, if I'm a load serving entity, I'm presumably paying the congestion rent for, you know, paying load the LMPs at my load and receiving the LMPs at my supply. But I also have allocations of CRRs that I don't pay for that I receive congestion revenue from. And then I'm also, you know, you're allocating out the auction revenue to, I don't know exactly how that's allocated, but I think it's to load serving entities in some form or fashion. So I guess, you know, it would sort of be the net of all those things that would sort of say how I'm doing versus just, you know, how much congestion rent there was versus how much payouts there were in aggregate.
Yeah. No, that's a fair feedback. I think this is right. You know, right now I think the graphic here is just sort of isolating just the auction efficiency in terms of the CRRs that are being auctioned off and a comparison of what the auction revenues that were received in the processes versus what was paid off in terms of notional, what would have been paid off in notional CR payments and what was actually paid off in pro rata CRs. And I think one thing that's been highlighted is that particularly for the portion that's being provided by the ISO, and I won't sort of jump into the you know, as part of the DMM's white paper, as well as I think feedback we received in the last round of wanting to you know understand the impact of like, was this, you know, is this producing the desired outcome for customers, this auction process. So I think this is kind of elucidating some of the comments that LSEs as well as the DMM provided, both as a part of the track 1A and 1B discussion, as well as in the comments we received for the stakeholder process. But I think you're sort of elucidating there might be a different holistic way that we can provide that analysis. And so, yeah, love to hear about that in your comments, if there's sort of a different way that we should be looking and reporting on this that could sort of paint a different picture of sort of the complete story of the impact to load serving entities. And it sounds like that's what you're getting at. So yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate that.
Sorry, can I just more follow up? Which is really just that somebody had asked a question or pointed out an observation about the effect of the shift factor cutoffs, and then your mics went out, and I don't think you guys ever addressed that. So I guess hearing what you have to say about that, and then also just hopefully that when you're talking about root causes, you're talking about, you know, how much it's the different transmission models versus other things that are affecting this shortfall.
Okay. I can speak to that. Does this, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. And I think am I understanding correctly, you're referring back to Ava's comment about the difference about the IFM results and right before the microphones went out. I appreciate that perspective, and that's definitely something that we can pinpoint for further discussion. Because I take the point there that we've been talking about converging CRR results to the day ahead results. but we should be looking at both. Can I also do a quick check here? We do have a couple more sections to go, and I want to make sure that we provide time for our presenters. Do we have any more questions in the queue at this time?
No more questions in queue.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. If there are further questions, I think the analysis and metrics, we are definitely going to be spending more time on this at future working group meetings. We will also have some open discussion at the end here if folks have further follow-up. Partha, did you want to?
Yeah, as we said before, I think that understanding, like, there's more. I think the feedback we had previously was like this high level is super helpful to understand and really wanting to get at that root cause. Like the root cause of specific events and specific instances and what those kind of foundational drivers are, both from a, the auction efficiency, the revenue inadequacy, it seems like it's a little more direct line. The auction efficiency is probably a little harder to, the analysis of sort of what the root causes are is sort of a little less clear, but trying to provide sort of an understanding of sort of more the granularity in terms of both of these elements. And so I think that that's what we're really trying to do is provide that specificity on, specific events, for example, that have sort of driven revenue inadequacy and what were the underlying causes. But if there's other feedback folks have in terms of what that analysis should look like, I think that, particularly, we'll have some time, I think, at the end for more of an open discussion as time allows. But I think that, like, also it might be really in the comments, like providing kind of more of like a detailed description around, here's what I'm wanting to see, here's the details around it, and here's why. I think that could be really helpful for us going forward. So, yeah. Maybe we can jump to the next section, Hillary. Yeah, please take it away.
Okay. So moving forward, the next thing we want to do here before we move into discussion of problem statements and open discussion is highlight the CRR-related items that we received from the ISO's policy roadmap process, because these are ideas that came in. That is a separate stakeholder process for those who are not involved in that, where stakeholders have the opportunity to submit policy ideas and questions. And so we received 5 items. We want to make sure that we highlight these right here at the beginning so that everybody is familiar with them. And what we're going to do, actually, where's the clicker here? Can we get the next slide? Oh, right. Thank you. Next slide, please. There we go. So what we have here are the summaries from the roadmap of these 5 items, and we are also going to have a couple of the owners of these proposals here to speak to them. So the first one is the Department of Market Monitoring. This is the summary from the roadmap, but we also have a couple slides, and they are here to speak briefly to that concept today for us. DMM, do we have you in the room? And we can move to the next slide.
We do have Roger. Roger, if you can raise your hand, we can go ahead and unmute you from DMM. Roger from DMM. Roger Avalos.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
He just got disconnected. He'll connect really soon. If you want to move on to the next slide, and he'll come back.
I think they just reconnected me.
Oh, there you are. Okay, perfect. We can hear you.
So I don't have the slides we sent, Partha. If not, it's okay though.
We do.
Yeah, so just got a few minutes here to point out that DMM has recommended replacing the current steer auction design, which has some fundamental flaws, with design where there's only willing sellers and buyers. This would just be in markets where the ISO no longer intervenes to sell CRs backed by transmission repairs. All transactions are just simple price swaps which is what CRs really are, between willing counterparties, and the contracts are actually going to would be firm and fully funded. So there'd be no need for these deficit offset charges, or as was the way of doing it before, and still done in other ISOs, all of them, subsidizing payments from rights that aren't purchased, whether that's directly in uplift or from constraints to which no rights were purchased. One of the arguments against this that we got, and basically the main argument, is that basically the ISO, MC, and many stakeholders assumed that such a market, which is only willing counterparties, wouldn't clear many, if any, contracts without the ISO intervening with the transmission model. Go to the next slide, please. So, you know, looking at the proposed framework, again, just treat it like a standard financial derivative market, like every other market in the world, other than FTRs and CRRs. The transmission model replaced with the normal financial model, where supply and demand at each node is balanced. CR allocation at LEDs can remain unchanged, except for probably don't need the offsets anymore, because the reason those were instituted was for the auction. LEDs continue to offer to sell allocate CRs voluntarily through the market. The ISO would serve as a standard central clearinghouse, like all other derivative markets. They would manage counterparty risk, but they would not take positions with direct financial exposure to the spot market. We had, there's some papers being written by Stanford University. Frank Walla came up with a financial model to run this, and he ran the actual bids. If you go to the next slide, please. He ran the actual bids to this willing seller design. From 2017 to 2018, how to use those bids, because after the changes starting in 2019, there's a lot of restrictions on where you can bid, and then also the offsets really change how you would value these. So, but when we ran through that, it cleared quite a significant amount of contracts, both from LSC selling their allocate CRs, but also from financial entities selling counterflow to provide liquidity. So we have a paper that writes up a lot more of the results of this that stakeholders please take a look at. I put the link at the next slide. So people want to look through that paper and see a lot of the results and more descriptions of what the design is, more the details, plus there's also an appendix to Professor Wallach's write-up of the issue. That's all at that link. And if you have any questions, you can always contact DMM, including myself, and I put my email address right there.
Thank you, Roger. Do we have any questions in the queue or in the room?
We do have a question in queue. Caller 512-971. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Seth with VTOL. I just have a question about that study that was done by Stanford. And maybe you can answer this question, maybe you can't because you weren't the one that ran it. But when you ran the bids and offers through the simulation, how to come up with, you know, the way the market would work and how much it would clear, and the prices, did you account for the market power that you'd be giving the LSC and its ability to exert that market power when it reoffers the CRs into that market that market creation?
Well, first they just ran the bids as they were, because there's, you know, no other options in that. Second, to think that there's market power, first they'd have to be a natural seller of these contracts, which means they have to have a natural long position, which I think if you look at the data, they are not naturally long. So I'm not sure why that would be a concern.
Well, they're holding all the congestion rents that are available to be reoffered, and you're assuming that they would offer the same prices that they would offer, you know, absent that, but yet they have all of the funds that would back up any offers into the auctions, and they could easily exert market power on any one of those paths because they're all non-competitive for the most part. You know, to just assume that, okay, well, I'm going to give all the CRs to an LLC and we're going to see how they reoffer them in for generation to get hedges, that's such a flawed concept, because if they hold all of the CRRs on these very fine paths between 2 points, they can exert market power the day is long.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to go into the whole in the discussion of the whole design here because it's just the scope. But I would say that many financial markets, large positions are taken by financial entities with no physical, no physical holdings of the underlying assets. And if somebody were to exercise market power and races, I mean, hopefully there would be competition by their financial entities. And this is a little bit of a conflation of this with transmission rights. When it's not, these are just purely financial contracts. So these are usually pretty contestable markets.
Thank you very much. If we could move to the next question online, that'd be great.
Yes, JK Wang, PG&E, go ahead.
Hi, this is JK from PG&E. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi, Roger. Thank you. First, I want to thank DMM published a very comprehensive report and also provided technical paper to support that. Heard this idea from DMM for a while, and having the technical paper with the mathematics examples is really helpful. Actually got a few questions. I wonder, first of all, will we have the opportunity to go into the design in more details in the future working groups?
Yeah, my understanding is the CAISO will provide us the opportunity to have a much longer presentation on the overall design and the data.
Okay, terrific. I want to be mindful of others' time as well, so I won't ask too detailed questions here. But I guess a general question after I read the papers being hanging in my mind for a while is that it seems a big assumption or a prerequisite of the design is that it proposes not to use congestion rent to fund the payouts in the design. I think, I was a little confused about the idea because, the whole CR thing is to use the congestion rent to pay the CR holders. And with that disconnection, I think, it seems will enable any model to eliminate a shortfall if there's no direct connection between the CR rents and the payout of the CR holders. So hopefully I can get an answer in the future presentations.
Well, I mean, like the the forward contract financial products on commodities, the connection between the physical and the financial is the prices. So the CRR markets, these RTOs are the only one that I'm aware of where they try to mix them. I think that mixing is more in people's minds than in reality. But yeah, so the prices are what connect you, and people's estimations and willingness to offer and buy are what create the market.
Thank you for the explanation, Stu. Thinking about that, we can discuss more. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And JK, I think earlier we were talking about you asked a question about the tie-in between auction efficiency and the pro rata allocation. And I think that like, I think I wanted to make sure that I believe I'd answered your question, but might not have provided as full of an answer as I should have, which is really, I think it's really just kind of the definition around auction efficiency. When they're looking at auction efficiency, they're really comparing the ratio of what was paid for the CRRs versus the actual payout. And so it's a very different measurement if you're looking at the nominal value of the CRRs versus if you're looking at the pro rata value in terms of calculating that efficiency number. And so I think that's the tie-in that our slide was trying to get at. I think that's also the comparison that the DMM is making, is that, you know, there's still a gap between the value of the ratio is still not 100% or is significantly less than 100%, even when looking at the pro-rate amount. And so I think at least to answer your question from previously, I think that's what we're really getting at, is that percentage. It might have changed from 50% to a slightly higher number, but there's still a significant gap. And I think that's what the DMM is highlighting here, and that we were trying to show in that slide. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Parsa.
All right.
We do have a question.
Okay. All
Let's
right.
go. I think Doug will be the last one from queue. Let's double check Doug.
Doug Bochignone for BAMX. Just following up on the JK's comment, it seems like there is a linkage, though, between these auction CRRs in this DMM model and then the underlying congestion. It's not directly linked to the congestion rents, but as I understand it, these CRRs would settle based on the marginal cost of congestion differences between the source and sink points, much like, the CRRs settled today. It's just that the settlement would be between the counterparties. Wouldn't be between load serving entities and the buyers. It would be between the auction participants themselves. But there is a direct linkage to the actual congestion measured in the market.
Yeah, that's correct. And that linkage comes from the market prices.
Roger.
Thank you.
All right. We will have time in future meetings to get further into all of these ideas. For the moment, did you have a question in the room? Please.
Thank you. This is Daniel Kutz with the Department of Water Resources. Taking back on the previous two callers, as David mentioned earlier, here the track 1B was the CRR revenue inadequacy was fully funded by the load service entity, track 1B, and at that time it was 50% in average for the past 10 years. Then track 1B make it look like it came up with the track 1B 65% over the past 6 years. I think in addressing, and when we talk in 2017-18, a stakeholder process for track 1B, it was mentioned lots of times that keeping together CRR auction and allocation keeps the liquidity and the transparency of the CRR product. And lots of market participants asked at that time ISO to prove that statement, to run test analysis and prove that it's true. I think to me that's the root of the problem. Doug touched a little bit on it. To what extent the CRR price and the bids and the benefits are tied to the dam optimization calculation of MSSC and marginal cost of congestion when CRR are settled. I think that's probably the root problem that needs to be defined when we decide, prior to decide if we're going to separate from allocation from the auction, is there a benefit, like the theory and the Terry said, the auction brings liquidity and transparency? Is that true? And then, depending on that, we saw this 50 cents to the dollar benefits in 2012. I don't know if DMM went that far, and probably at that time, not knowing too much, we advocated for separating of those. Thought that's the easiest way to fix the revenue adequacy problem. I think prior to that, they're answering the root problem, which if it provides liquidity, auction provides liquidity and transparency, we have to consider that the participants in the auction are there to make a benefit. Reaching 100% on average means some of them will be losers, some of them will be winners, but they might lose the incentives of participant in the auction. So then what's the purpose of them participating in the auction if we tend for that 100% revenue adequacy if not, this auction keeping there maintains the liquidity. And here I am, a LSC, a representative advocate for the financial entities, but I want to make sure this is the right way and the root cause problem, and still not understand how the bids in auction, they help establish the market LNP. I think it's a paragraph in the presentation that you posted on the 12th that it says, I so thought that the CRRs imply flow in the day-ahead market. So that paragraph I quite not understand. I'm going to send it to you in the comments after, and I think further explanation wants to be that. So that's to me the points I want to make, and thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I captured all the questions in there, but hopefully we can go over that in the longer presentations, or you can always email me a question. But I will say, most for markets, there's always a buyer and seller on each side of the trade. Just because one's making profit on financially on that contract doesn't mean both aren't benefiting. It's kind of like when you buy insurance for your car. At least for me, I haven't been in any accidents lately. Financially, it maybe looks like a bad deal, but I'd still rather have that insurance. I don't think the idea that one person has to pay another person, why would anybody, then, the total profits in the market sum to zero. That doesn't seem like a thing that would kill a market to me, since, that's how financial markets work everywhere else. So.
I appreciate there's a lot more we could discuss on this, and we will. Just in the interest of time, I know we have a couple more ideas to get through, and then the draft problem statements. So at this time, why don't we move to Western Power Trading Forum? I think we can want to make sure we get through all of the presentations. WPTF, are you, Callie, are you ready?
Yeah, I can take over. Yeah, so Kelly Wells had to drop off a little bit, so let's move it on to Daniel.
Mm-hmm. And that'll be the next slide. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, this is Daniel Kretzer, Department of Water Resources. We submitted this issue about 5 months ago, when I started the revamp catalog initiative. And I take this opportunity to thank you them for starting a new process, and when they listen much more to the market participants. Yeah, this is a issue that somehow ties to the WPTF, which the WPTF asked to reconsider looking at the CRR product overall. When the CRRs were designed starting 2002, implemented 2009, there were much less renewables, far less renewables in the ISO system, in the grid, ISO grid, and the low demand curve, more of a one hump and addition to the renewable over time, heavy addition of the renewable led to a two hump camel shape. And we believe the volatility of CRRs and diminishing on their prices to, I would say, on-peak CRRs is caused by this shift of the, in the low demand and the pricing with probably our 7 to 16 with ISO being an exporter, maybe our 12 to 16 when it was high solar activity, and then from our 17 to 21, ISO being an importer. So the congestion in various segments of the ISO grid might change during periods, directions. And of course, so that our proposal is to also look into this, if possible, to run studies and see if splitting the time of use and find the time of use, on-peak time of use splitting will be the most valuable and will improve values and of the CRRs and their volatility. Improvement meaning that's volatile. So that's kind of the proposal.
Thank you. If we can move to the next slide. So we do the three and then take questions.
This one is an issue, the global delay factor applied to the available transmission capacity for the monthly CRR allocation process. It's taking half of the, so it's 65% of the total available transmission capacity from the resulting from CRR for the total model is allocated in the annual process. I mean, the grid is available for annual process and 35% is remaining. However, since the track 1B and prior to track 1B, the GDF ran in an average of 17.5%, meaning that half of that 35% after the track 1B implementation is available for the market participants in the allocation process. I would use a small example that it turned out without the GDF, and I selected this August 2020 when our congestion rents, actual congestion rents, equal around 3 million, and it worked two ways. One way, because track 1B was implemented, with a notional value in place we have received, and this one ties a little bit to the previous discussion on the DMM proposal and the CRR revenue. We got half, a little bit less than half of the CRR congestion rents, actual congestion rents in actual CRR revenues because of the D rates. The notional value of being applied and track 1B have not been implemented, and notional value have been applied. We have gotten all our CRR congestion rents hedged. Well, it might be an extreme example. August 2020 was a heat wave, probably, if I recall. But to us, the CRRs are designed to hedge for those extreme events. That's the purpose of a CRR as a financial product. We can run this example for an average for the total period of 6 years after track 1B, and if it's necessary. Now, let that aside, if track 1B is implemented and we didn't get, we thought without the GDF we'll have receive double amount of CRRs. Maybe it's a big assumption, but to some extent we could have gotten double or less than double or more than double CRRs, and we believe we have hedged all our congestion rates. So with track 1B, that was our comment prior to this GAO initiative. We didn't see why GDF is still needed. I understand initially track 1B, and prior, I'm not sure, when we commented on this issue a while ago, I think it's another DMM representative for DMM or from a market surveillance committee said that it was already approved by FERC, and I'm not sure if this GDF approved by FERC was prior to track 1B or after track 1B implementation. But I think track 1B showed that it fixed some issues. Then I don't see why a GDF is still needed. So that's what I believe, and I think other market participants could benefit from taking out this global direct factor applied to the monthly CRR allocation process, or at least they can look in their CRRs and in their past performances to see if without the GDF they would have performed better, which to me it's obvious, but for them, I don't know. That's all I have to say on this issue. And number three is the counterflow CRRs. As I talked to some representatives that are today in the panel yesterday, this one was the issue. We requested heavily CRRs from trading hubs prior to 2014, 15, and actually even 2015. And at that time, there were cases when we received 100 direct flow CRRs and 99 counterflow CRRs, which in theory is supposed to be annihilate each other, and we got just one direct flow of CRR that it was actually the one that will bring us benefits. The other 100 benefits provided by 100 airflow will be countered by the counterflow CRRs. We thought ISO has all the methods of reducing the number of allocated CRRs in the system to improve the revenue adequacy, and we thought if this thing happened to other market participants, then there are probably more CRRs added to the system, and it might turn out due to the condition different when the CRRs are allocated direct flow and counterflow CRRs versus when the direct flow and the counterflow CRRs are hedged, settled. It might turn out that this could add to the CRR revenue inadequacy. So, however, we stopped requesting CRRs for a number of 6 years at Trading Hub, and we started recently in the monthly allocation for the past 2 months, and we've seen that these cases didn't repeat themselves. We thought at that time it happened because ISO introduced some other restriction like the median OTC, again for the same idea of restricting the number of allocated CRR in the system. So to me, the issue, this one, we can put it in the back burner unless other market participants consider it's an issue. For the past months, 2 or 3 months that we participated and we used a Trading Hub as a source, and we got counterflow CRRs. They range in less than 5%. I think just 1 month was 10%, which to us is acceptable. And that's all I have to say. We can put it in the back burner unless other market participants look at their CRRs requesting from Trading Hub to their source, to their sinks, and see if they have a problem with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Do we have any questions on those three ideas? Should I bring a? Here.
This is Aaron Black from Saracen Energy. So I had a question about the global derate factor section. You know, as it's been greatly discussed here, given the amount of comments and discussion and requested feedback and studies around funding adequacy, I don't think it'd be too much of an exaggeration to say that's probably the most pressing issue on everyone's mind. And so when we look at the global derate factor, you know, at the heart of underfunding, as it's been mentioned by someone else in the meeting already, at the heart of it, too many FDRs, CRRs are getting issued that the system can't support. So if we undid that global derate factor, wouldn't that, in a general sense, just instantly make this problem worse on the funding side?
Well, I think ESO needs to run some studies to show, because that was, to me, the question, let's say 4 or 5 years ago. And it didn't, it was just between us and ISO, and didn't got tracked, was how well, I mean, prior to the track 1B, yes, it's definitely needed, but track 1B got some improvements. Then it's still needed, I understand, but track 1B is supposed to fix the issues. I mean, I just gave for us the example as a allocation for that month in particular, and I can provide again I can look at the numbers in average, that for that month we would have got hedged completely without the GDF or without the auction and allocation being together. So either way, for us, we have been hedged. It's probably, I don't know if it's a perfect example, but either way, without the without the auction allocation together, we have hedged because of the notional value settlement we have applied. And then, okay, that one was not applied because track 1B, but without the GDF, with track 1B in place, we would have been completely hedged for our congestion lands, would have been completely hedged for that month. So that's our point on it.
Thanks, Aaron. This is Partha from the California ISO. We've had a number of discussions about that, and I'd be interested in your perspective. Like, partly how we viewed that comment was, you know, it might be done in conjunction with other reforms. Like and I think it might tie in well to Kelly's discussion, where there's been a number of parties that when they're looking at the current design and some of the impact to CRR holders, it's kind of like, it's almost like a two-part question of like, how do we address those root causes? And can we understand and address the root causes in a way that minimizes the impacts to revenue inadequacy? And if we did that, is there a way to, you know, is there an opportunity to maybe relook at the global derate factor as a whole, as a part of a comprehensive solution? So that's always what we interpret it as, sort of like okay, this might be something that we can look at together in terms of like, it's a fairly blunt tool as opposed to a more surgical tool that could get at those root causes. So
that makes a lot of sense. So just for clarification, without that first step in the two-step process that you just outlined, you know, is it fair to say that the global derate factor is kind of helping and protecting, even though, like you said, it's a blunt instrument, it's just kind of what do you call it, like a, fudge factor, essentially, right? But if we didn't address those root cause issues and just removed it, would we expect revenue inadequacy to be worse?
Yeah, I think that's what I think you described it the way I look at it. Maybe I'll allow someone else, like Philip, or anyone else who wants to respond to that in terms of what those trade-offs look like. But
yeah, this is Philip. I mean, just my input on that is, if we were to remove a global derate factor, more CRRs would be able to clear the allocation and auction processes, which in a general concept would likely lead to further inadequacy. But I think, the request and kind of that's maybe just a high level, speculation, and maybe the request here is to actually provide further analysis on that to see how much of that is, or what's the actual impact.
At this point, we have one idea left, and I believe we do have Kelly on the line. Kelly, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me okay this time?
We can hear you loud and clear. Let me get your slide up here. There you go.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was having audio issues last time. I was trying to get your guys' attention, but clearly didn't come through. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'll go through this pretty quickly. I think the issue that we brought to the CAISO earlier this year is really first understanding and recognizing, we agree with what the CAISO said at the beginning, is that CRRs are intended to provide a hedging instrument against day-ahead congestion costs. And so our issue really focuses on things that we've seen since the 2019 changes were put in place, and really is getting at that underfunding or the revenue inadequacy numbers that we're seeing. And, earlier on it was mentioned that this, the way the underfunding is done has increased the risk and volatility of holding a CRR, and even in some cases have flipped it from being a hedging instrument to being a liability to hold in the first place. So it's really understanding what is the driving factors that's still contributing to underfunding, because back when we were going through the policy discussions in 2018, most of those changes were really trying to get at aligning the transmission assumptions and topology between the CRR model and the day-ahead market. So clearly there's other things still going on to continue to have this amount of underfunding. So it's getting a really good handle on what those drivers are, making sure that once we identify those, that any underfunding is allocated back out on a cost causation basis. So, the constraint by constraint methodology, if I recall correctly, the CAISO's reasoning for going that route is because the expectation was any remaining underfunding was due to transmission outages and derates that occurred between the CRR model and the day-ahead market. So constraint by constraint was cost causation. But so really understanding what's still going on, making sure that, maybe there's other ways to allocate that underfunding if there's other factors. I think Auburn brought up a couple points that there might be things going on in the market optimization that's contributing to that. There might be some congestion rent we're not collecting, from participants using the transmission system, whether or not that's the shift factor threshold issue or any other factors going on. So again, really getting at the root drivers to the underfunding. I do want to comment on, a couple commenters have mentioned that the revenue inadequacy is due to the fact that we're allocating too many CRRs, or we're issuing too many CRRs. And I don't think that's necessarily a foregone conclusion, because it could be that we just aren't collecting the amount of congestion rent we should be. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as well. And with that, the other issue that we would really like to see the CAISO dive into is, because of the added risk and volatility that CRRs are experiencing now, whether or not that's had an impact on how participants participate in the CR auction. Have we seen a decrease in CR participation through that auction process? Have participants reflected higher risk in their bids when they engage into the CR auction? What impact that might have had? Because that will obviously also trickle into the market efficiency metric. So again, I know we're actually now over time, so I will leave it at that. But I think our big goal here is to get the CR products stood up again. to where they can continue to be used effectively as the hedging instrument against the day-ahead congestion costs. So thank you.
Thank you, Callie. While we're pulling up the next slide here, does anyone have direct responses at this time? All right. Thank you to all three of our presenters there. We will now move into the final segment of our meeting today, which is really bringing it all together to what is going to be the through line of this working group process, which is developing the problem statements that will set us up to move into policy development. So what we have up here is just a starting point. It is statements that we have pulled from the feedback that we have received so far, both in the roadmap items and also with the context of the conversation from the previous initiative. So we put these up here as a starting point and a conversation starter. And as we move forward, especially the very next thing will be comments on this meeting and also the discussion paper. We really encourage and are open to edits to both the statements on the screen and in the paper and also completely new ones. I will pause here for a moment. Partha, would you like to say anything on that?
No, yeah, I really appreciate the, I recognize that we're 2 minutes after noon, so, and I always, yeah, I'm hesitant to keep, I recognize that keeping people long can have consequences to the, to the meeting. So, yeah, I think that we're really, like I said before, like, I think that a lot of these problem statements can be better informed by, by analysis. And I think that, like, that's what we're hoping to do with some of that root cause analysis. If there's anything else that you all think in particular could really be kind of honed in to do the problems to, like, help, refine those problem statements, we'd love to hear that feedback. But I think as well that, I think that, like, really trying to understand the use, the value proposition from participants to the current structure and the current CRs will be an important piece as well in terms of refining and understanding the problem statement. So I think that that's, like, this is the starting point, but I think that I hope that sort of two-way education where you'll are explaining to us kind of like how it's being used, how CRs are being used, how it fits into the hedging of congestion risks, as well as that analysis can help us to refine these and bring us to at least a better place. And I think we recognize as well the fact that there's going to be a lot of different interests and a lot of different perspectives in the problem statement. And so, I don't think we're looking for 100% consensus around what they look like, but really kind of a grounding on all the different perspectives on the problem statement, and then we can help refine them as we move into the solution space. So.
All right. And as we're beginning to think about those, I will also bring up again as an item for discussion in the comments. We saw this slide at the beginning, sort of a tentative schedule for the working group. This is completely flexible. We are open to ideas on what would be useful to spend more time on. The root cause analysis is high on that list. But I think we heard some discussion today of other things like the SRF system and the auction structure that sounds like we could add to the list. So that is something, and we will be sending out a comment template shortly after this meeting in the next couple of days with some specific questions in this regard on the problem statements and also what you would like to see at future meetings.
Yeah, I call as well. I think that it seemed like we had a good discussion about sort of the ability for external entities to obtain CRRs and our current, maybe more grounded in that current evolving process for how those allocations work. So yeah, but really, maybe we can sort of open up to sort of one last round of sort of open discussion, just to sort of before we close out. Does that sound good, Hillary?
Yep. Floor is open.
Well, I'm optimistic that the lack of raised hands means that we hit it perfectly in terms of the schedule and scope and topics. I'm not guessing that everybody's going to be in complete agreement on every solution, but at least I think step one, it seems like a very positive direction. But hopefully,
We do have Alex, who is
Right.
trying to unmute himself. Let's go ahead and unmute Alex.
Hey everyone, thank you
Go
for
ahead.
organizing. Thank you for organizing this. Just a quick question on the analysis aspect. Who is going to be leading that? Is that going to be through DMM, or is there going to be another team on the stakeholder initiative that will be assembled within CAISO to look at some of these issues?
yeah, I won't speak for the DMM. I'm sure that they will. They've done a substantial amount of analysis, and I imagine they'll be continuing to do analysis. But it's a separate group within the ISO. Most people are familiar with Guillermo, in that him and his team and the market analysis function are spearheading that effort on sort of the future analysis.
Okay, it's Guillermo's team. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
And Guillermo, I think, will certainly be here in future meetings to have those discussions. Unfortunately, we had a conflict for this meeting, but I think that, yeah, he's certainly going to have an active role in shaping and presenting that analysis in the future. But yeah, so thanks for the question.
And one more question, or does someone have a question in the room? Calling user 18, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Seth again with VTOL. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. I had a comment that I wanted to make on behalf of Sempra Solutions. They're the largest direct access provider in the state of California. Justin Pano wasn't able to get his audio to work through the call, but he basically wanted me to relay that he supports an expansion of the FTR auctions, and he relates his experiences in California to what he sees in PJM. And actually, he has noted that he can actually pass on less risk premiums to his customers and lower cost as a result of having more robust FTR structures. And he is a load server, this company is. And he wanted to make that point that if the CAISO was to expand the auctions, he has, in his experience, seen where he can lower risk premiums to his customers and lower prices to his consumers by having expanded auctions. So I just wanted to throw that out there on his behalf. Thank you.
Thank you for conveying that, Beth. Stand by one moment.
We have a comment in the room. Go ahead.
This is Aaron Black from Saracen Energy. Just wanted to kind of bring up, we spent a lot of time talking about Track 1B and the implications it's had to funding. We haven't talked a lot about Track 1A, and in particular, the nodal bid restrictions from gen to load. That's a very unique feature in CAISO, and I'm wondering, have you all done any look back to see, okay, this was our intention on why we implemented this, what have been the implications of this, both in its own right and as it relates to funding, possibly kind of limiting the amount of, trade development and trade availability and kind of herding everyone into the same directional trades, and how that's all played out in the end. Have you all looked at that or thought about that at all?
Still offer it back. There has been there's been discussions. Like, I don't know, we can certainly, I would think maybe it's just maybe a pushback would be, I think it'd be far more interesting to understand what the impact is from outside parties. And if there's certain analysis that you'll want from us, I think that we can, certainly include in your comment. I think that's sort of one example where stakeholder perspective on what the impact of it is on hedging in particular, I think would be really, really, really useful. Any last comments on online?
No more questions online, Partha.
Any more in the room? All right. All right. Well, with that, I think that we can wrap up today. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And we have a couple final slides here. So we will have the comment template out shortly. This will be for comments on both today's conversation and the discussion paper. That will be December 12th we're looking at for receiving those. Will be confirmed with the market notice. And we have some final slides here. Well, we do have, there's an initiative page for this on our website where you can find all the materials. If you have questions, we have the address up there. Brenda, I believe you have some final closing.
Yeah, thank you, Hillary. So we do plan that post.comment template. That link was provided in the chat. We also provide a discussion paper, as well as the annual policy roadmap has posted a document related to the 2024 annual policy initiatives roadmap process. That would just highlight a spreadsheet overview of a visual that we wanted to provide. We do know that we may have questions, so feel free to send them over to ISO stakeholder affairs at kaizo.com. And then we will also be noticing any upcoming meetings. The last slide we have to present is that the Energy Blog Matters is providing the most up-to-date information that we have posted, the stakeholder symposium panels, video recordings on our YouTube channel. So feel free to visit those recordings that were shown during the symposium. As well, we also have celebrated our WEIM video commemorates and the 10 years of benefits and growth and issues that also was shown during the symposium event this year. So those are the latest updates I can provide today for everyone. And thanks so much for everyone who was on the call. But I think we were ready to close this call. So I think we're good from my end. Thank you so much, Hillary, Partha, Dinesh, and David.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.